All right, everyone, score one for the Trump team today, a major optics win. It's more about optics than it is any pragmatic reality, but there's something deeper that I'm not really seeing discussed, and it's potentially a huge win for Trump, bigger than actually the story. The big story is that Trump's team, the U.S. government and the Mexican government, last minute before Trump's tariffs, 5% across the board, I think, on all Mexican goods, which would have been problematic for U.S. businesses too, trust me. Now, the tariffs will not go into effect. A deal was reached. Now, what will happen is Mexico is deploying thousands of troops to its border. They're deploying National Guard around the country to stave off sort of the migrant movement sort of thing that's happening there. And also, they're going to allow asylum seekers to be kept in Mexico, given aid there, which sort of negates their, the need for a lot of them to come to the U.S. border. Now, this will not stop the crisis on our southern border, but what it will do is slow it down. Now, here's why that's important. One thing you've got to understand is this. One of the main reasons that Trump has been unable to properly process, detain, deport, and basically do anything is because the court stepped in and said, look, you don't have enough detention centers, it's inhumane conditions due to overcrowding, and so you can only temporarily detain people under most circumstances. That is, if you're processing the person, you've got no reason to believe they're specifically a terrorist or a criminal, you can't keep them, I think, longer than, 30 or 60 days. And that's due to overcrowding. But what if there only half as many people are coming across the border? Well, then they're not going to be overcrowded anymore. See, this will fundamentally solve the problem because then the detention length, presumably, Congress will not be able to legitimately stand in the way of it being longer. The Trump administration will make the case the court's decision before no longer holds any sway because it was prefaced on a situation that simply no longer exists. One thing that could be a problem is that the congressional Democrats, I expect, if that argument is made, will then turn around and say, well, it's obviously no longer a national security threat, so now you can't emergency fund the wall. But at the same time, with the help of Mexico, it might not make a difference. What if Mexico really does pay for the wall, but on its own southern border? What if the Mexican government, which is going to have to pay for basic health care and food and so forth, education for the children of these refugees, what if they say, well, it's going to be cheaper if we just put up a concrete embankment on our southern border? It'll be cheaper. It'll be easier. Sort of a safe, the idea as well, there's something called safe third country. This is a proposal that the U.S. wants. Right now, Mexico doesn't offer asylum to people from Central America. They don't offer asylum to one another's residents. Therefore, for a lot of these people, in order to claim asylum, it has to be an adjacent country willing to take the refugees. It's sort of able to walk across border situation. Right now, the closest is the United States. If Mexico ever decides, yes, we are going to become a safe harbor for people, for political asylum seekers and stuff, they no longer have any legitimate claim to claim asylum in the U.S. Now, this deal falls short of that. This deal does not have Mexico doing that. But it fundamentally, the Mexican government, I think, looked at the situation. The reason why it was obvious that there was going to be a deal struck fairly quickly is this. Mexico relies, a lot of its industry relies upon sales to the U.S. If you have this kind of tariff, a lot of the U.S. firms would immediately have to begin looking to other countries. This is happening already to China. Mexico looked at China and said they're hemorrhaging, productivity right now. Their growth has slowed considerably in a single quarter because of U.S. tariffs, because of a U.S. trade war. The Chinese economy may be able to deal with that short term, but even that's not necessarily going to be a long-term thing that the Chinese economy can deal with. Eventually, they'll probably crack. The Mexican economy is not China. Mexico is not a nuclear power. It's not a highly developed industrial economy. It's developing, but it's not at China's level. GDP-wise, it's nowhere near the size of China as far as its economic impact in the world. It also doesn't have its own sphere like China does. China has sort of a loose collective of different states that are sort of on its side, that are in its sphere. It's a power. Mexico is not a power. It's a decent-sized country with an okay military apparatus. But nobody says, well, shit, the Mexicans are going to invade tomorrow. But they might worry about that about China if they're in Asia, or about the U.S. if they're anywhere in the fucking world that's not under Russia or Chinese sphere. But Trump has a huge win here. This is a major foreign policy victory. Probably ticks the box for one of the keys to the White House, in all honesty. Especially if things begin to simmer at the border. If they begin to slow down, like the refugee movements and stuff, because people from Central America are like, well, we can go to Mexico. If we're looking for just, if we're legitimately wanting to be refugees, we can get everything in Mexico. There's no reason to march 1,000 further miles. That will help. For those that are more, they're just coming for jobs or whatever, they can't get that in Mexico. The U.S. might make a legal case that Mexico is basically now a safe third country and try to go through the courts and litigate that. The Trump administration could at least try. And in the meantime, it would take pressure off of our own border, even if it's not a complete solution. The real solution to this is build a cohesive barrier, a coherent defense system along our southern border, something that actually functions. It doesn't have to look pretty. It's not going to be a medieval fortification. It's going to look more like the standard barriers we already use. They work. They've been shown to work. They obviously work, or they wouldn't have built them in certain places in the first place. At parts of our border, it is little more than a 20-30 foot concrete embankment with a chain link fence at the top and sporadic border control. In some parts, it's literally nothing more than a vehicle barrier. You can walk across the U.S.-Mexico border. No shit, there's a problem with the refugee movements, with movements of people who want to migrate into this country, either for a job or maybe for ill intent or drug running. Some of them are desperate, I understand that, but if they can get everything they need in Mexico, it's like, why bother coming to the United States anyway? If you're looking for a better life in the United States, the problem is the U.S. can only afford that to a certain number of people every year coming in as immigrants. And that's why we have a legal immigration system, which itself is onerous, burdensome, throttled, and makes no sense. Yes, it is fucked up. But until that's it, Congress doesn't want to fix it. They don't even want to talk about the problem. If the Democrats are serious about think of the children stuff, okay, well then fix the immigration system and clamp down on the border. That's about all. Peace out.